Buy the book. People are always asking writers, where do you get your ideas? And writers are always saying, oh God, I hate that question. I actually think it's a perfectly reasonable question, although a lot of us don't have an answer. But I know you have an interesting answer because I've heard you. I've asked you.
You mean someone's asking that question before?
Yeah.
And I was actually going to ask you that, so we'll start there. So, yeah, ideas for me don't always come from the same place, and this one actually has a sort of odd place about it, because the story really didn't have anything to do with people at first. Even though the book is very much about people. It was about the economy, which makes it sound boring, but it's not some weird financial thriller, I promise. But the idea came to me sort of in winter of 2008, right? What was happening in winter of 2008? It was right when we were realizing just how bad the economy was. You know, John McCain saying, let's hold off on the campaigning stuff while we save the economy because it's that bad. As you all know, because we're here in New York, it was a period when I walk my dog every morning around my neighborhood, which is in the Village, your neighborhood as well. And the juxtaposition between that time and that neighborhood and when I first moved to Manhattan in 2003 was huge. When I first moved there in 2003, there was no empty space to be found. I mean, everybody's just throwing money everywhere. And by 2008, in the Village, every single day, some other storefront would be closed. And these weren't fly-by-night places. These were family businesses that had been in the Village for 20 and 30 years. Like these little drugstores would just suddenly be gone. And it wasn't even the kind of thing that the way businesses usually go out of business, where they say they're closed, out of business sale, and you've got a month's notice and all this stuff. It would, as you all know, it would be there Tuesday. I'd walk my dog by, and Wednesday it would be gone. Like not just closed, but everything was stripped out. There was paper on the windows, you know, usually in broken English, some signs saying closed, you know, closed. And I started to think about what must that be like, right? And I started to think about the things we dedicate ourselves to, and what is it like to commit yourself to a business in that way, to help run a small business for 20 and 30 years and then just to lose it overnight. And every day I kept seeing it, and it probably shows the weird thing that writers do, that nothing like that's very remarkable. But then I started thinking about, is that a book? And I started thinking about some of my favorite thrillers I've read are this notion of the things we dedicate ourselves to turn out to be not what we expect, right? So Harlan Coben has created his own genre, basically, right? About what if our families are not what we expect? We think we know who our husband is, we think we know who our wife is. What if it turns out they're not what we believe? Lisa Unger has written books, you know, you wake up one day and you find out your husband's not the man you thought he was. And I started thinking about, much like those books tap into this place of insecurity, to think the one thing that you think you know so well isn't at all what you thought. Is itself a scary thing? But then I started thinking about, we dedicate ourselves to family, sure, but many people, the next thing that's most important in their life is their work, right? So how well do you know your boss is kind of the hook of, I started thinking like that could be an interesting book. And to the extent it required fleshing that out, you know, it seemed to me that to the extent I need my books to be not just plot but character driven, I was reading simultaneously all these stories about unemployment, and not the figures, but the psychological toll that unemployment takes on a person, and how these people who get laid off, you know, it's a horrible thing that happens, but they assume, you know, their severance package is going to get them through. And I'm sure you've read these articles about people who have been unemployed now for years to the point that they don't work, they don't even look anymore, and the psychological toll that takes on them. And so I started thinking about maybe this character who after 8 months is really in a down place, and that might make her believe something about the job that seems a little too good to be true. And part of her journey is not just digging herself out of this place where the police are showing up at her house unannounced saying what's going on, but part of her journey is sort of finding her way out of this funk that she's been in where she thinks of herself as a loser, sort of finding a new identity apart from work and apart from success and all of those things. So a very long-winded answer, but yeah, it started with closed storefronts.
And you're gonna ask the same question?
Yes, where did your idea?
Yeah, this one started. My books always start with a question about something along those lines, something big, not people either, but what's kind of going on here. And this takes place in the world of Chinese art, Chinese contemporary art, which has fascinated me for a long time because it has complicated political uses here and in China, and it has complicated market values. Some of the best work is worth huge fortunes, so is some of the worst and most cynical. Some of the best is not even noticed. Artists, for various reasons, can and can't get visas. Ai Weiwei was arrested while I was working on it, and he was presumed to be untouchable. And the whole thing has always fascinated me, and I thought, okay, there's got to be a book in there someplace, because wherever there's complexity and a lot of money, there's crime. So I just sort of plunged in, and I thought, I was taking a course in Chinese contemporary art. I take a lot of courses, and it was taught by a guy who had been in art school in the 80s and had been at Tiananmen Square and, was not arrested or shot, coincidentally, randomly. Some of his friends were. He lives here now, and he taught this whole course almost unable to speak about that time. And I thought, well, that kind of ties in very well to what's going on now. The opening of China that led to that, and then the Chinese thought, oh my God, what have we done, and cracked down. And then the opening of China again until now, when the artists, and artists have been protected in a way that writers haven't in China, because they make so much money. Liu Xiaobo has been in prison since 2009. He's a Nobel Prize winner, but it doesn't matter because he's not worth millions. Ai Weiwei had a couple of extra years and is now out, which Liu Xiaobo isn't, because he is worth millions, and the Chinese government likes their, they tax their artists the same way we do, and they like their millions. And so it's a very complicated. How does an artist respond to that? When knowing that he's getting away with stuff that other artists can't get away with. So that's where that came from. And then I thought, okay, again, you have to bring it down to humans. You can't write a treatise. You have to write a book about people. And I had Lydia and Bill already, and I have another detective that I brought in, whom I also created about a year ago. This guy, Jack Lee, who is also a Chinese American, but he's an art detective, it's what he does. And I started writing this book, and I thought, oh, wait a minute. Jack wants to get in. Yeah, Jack wants to get in on this act. So I brought him in, and I expected to bring him in as a consultant and, have a little thing between him and Lydia, and then he would leave again. But apparently not. I was having too good a time. So that's where this came from.
Well, I have a follow-up question. Since you have written more books than I have, you have written both more series books and more standalones. This was my first standalone, and then I just finished my next series book, which will come out. So for me, the transition, writing this book, I kind of knew what I wanted to do because I had this idea. Going back to a series book, I actually found bumpy, like to get myself back into that, and I'm having a hard time articulating what is so different about the process. But so when you have some idea you're interested in, so your big idea is Chinese contemporary art, how do you decide in your gut whether that book is going to be a series book or whether it's going to be a standalone?
That's a really good question. And I think that's part of the problem you're having is probably that your series it has riverbanks. The river can kind of go wherever it wants, but it does have banks.
Right.
And a standalone, you can do anything. You can change the voice. You can change the time. You can do whatever you want. And it's not that there's anything inherently bad or unpleasant about writing within the riverbanks, but you have to get used to it again. I approach it a slightly different way. I think, okay, I'm ready to do a Lydia book now. And that gives me, you know, all of sort of Chinese culture, all of Chinese American culture, all of Asian culture in New York. There's a book, there's a Hindu temple in Queens I really want to use. And it would be a great Lydia thing, because Lydia doesn't know any more about Hindu temples than most of my readers, so, you know, Lydia could go there and say, oh my God. And I like that when Lydia gets to do that, because then the readers get to learn stuff. And I approach Bill Smith books the same kind of way, that if I'm going to do a Bill Smith book, it's going to be darker, it's going to be, you know, there's going to be a certain amount of music in it, there's going to be, you know. When I have an idea for a book that says, man, I really would like to write about this, that's when the standalones tend to happen. The In This Rain, which was the second standalone, the first standalone was Absent Friends, and that was a 9/11 book, and that was a kind of special case, because I needed to write about 9/11, or I figured I couldn't write anything else when it happened. And to write that as a Bill or Lydia book would have trivialized it. So, but the second luckily for me, the contract for that called for 2 standalones. It was a different publisher for my series. And there had been another one I'd been wanting to write for a while, and I hadn't had the nerve. And that needed to be a standalone, because that was about real estate and architect, all these things that I learned as an architect about how real estate works, and gentrification in Harlem, and all kinds of stuff that would not have worked well for either Bill or Lydia. So I got to do that. So it sort of depends on whether I'm entering it from the character or from the idea for the book. And you know, the dirty little secret here is it depends what you have a contract for too. If your publisher says, you know, I want 3 more series books, then you're entering it from the character, because you have to. But that's how I decided. I do a lot of the things I have as just ideas. I do first as short stories outside the series to see if they'll work outside, and then I can come back and write that novel if they do